Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today we're going to continue the series, The Port Authority, where I take a look at some of my favorite arcade games of all time and weigh them against their home console ports. And if you can't tell already, we're playing Sega Rally 2 on both the Sega Model 3 arcade board as well as the Dreamcast. Because when I say this is one of the best arcade racing games Sega ever made, I 100% mean it. And while the Model 3 original is absolutely still one of the best games you can play, the Dreamcast port definitely suffered a lot coming home, and it is a notorious bad port, so we're going to talk about why that is today. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But I still remember the first time I saw this game at my local arcade, the Dream Machine, growing up. I absolutely fell in love with the game, having played the original Sega Rally both in the arcades and on Sega Saturn. So honestly, this was a total win for me. And when you played Model 3 in arcades back in the day, you could tell that the hardware was a full generational leap beyond what we would have at home. Now I am playing this in the Supermodel emulator, and I'm giving it an internal rendering resolution bump, and I will do the same thing on the Dreamcast side of things as well, so they are having a fair fight. But this is quintessentially classic Sega arcade racing goodness. All the bright colors, all the amazing textures, the fact that it's running at a 60 frame per second lock, this is just what you want when you're playing a Sega arcade racing game. And when this was announced for Dreamcast, I picked it up on launch day, being absolutely excited to be able to play this same game at home without having to dump a ton of quarters into the machine. Unfortunately, when I got home, I'm not saying the game's not fun, I'm just saying that it is fundamentally a massive downgrade compared to the arcade original. Right off the top, the entire lighting scheme and color profile has been swapped around on the Dreamcast, losing all of that fun vibrancy that you're getting in the arcades. Secondarily, this game will slow down as far as the frame rate is concerned. It has VSync, so if it's going to drop frames, you're going to go right down to 30 frames per second in engine. So this loses all of the fluidity that the arcade original had. And when you're talking Sega and arcade racing games, fluidity 100% matters. The feel of the game is more important than anything else. If they had changed the lighting model and kept this at 60 frames per second locked, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it, nor would anyone else back in the day. But it's the fact that the game feels like it's speeding up and slowing down internally that is a very hard thing for your brain to wrap its head around when you're actually trying to control the vehicle. And then again, when you change the lighting and color model here, kind of making it feel a little bit more drab, it just ends up being a letdown. Now there is a rumor that this is because of the Windows CE operating environment that it was ported for, and that doesn't really hold up. The frame rate drops are on the Dreamcast side. This just isn't a great port. Now moving back over to the Model 3 original, again, you can just see all of that color vibrancy just come up onto the screen. You have so many more characters at the side of the screen, as well as these photographers that are running in to take a photograph and then running back out of frame with all of the flashes. There's so much more detail in the Model 3 original, and while it's not surprising that some of that detail would have been lost when you came over to Dreamcast, because Model 3 was definitely more powerful in some respects, the amount of detail that's lost and the amount of charm that's gone just 100% makes this a bummer of a port. And you'll see here we'll move over to the Dreamcast version again, and now it feels like we're racing in a completely different time of day. You have fog going on, and you just lose so much of the visual performance. You can just tell in the cadence of this footage how much different this game looks and feels compared to the Model 3 original, and that is the biggest sin the game commits. Sega was the master of arcade racing back in the 90s and 2000s, and still to this day one of the best developers of racing games. So when you get a Dreamcast game from a Model 3 board and in the racing genre, you expect the exact same thing. As we move back over to Model 3, it is just night and day different, pun very much intended for that color profile, but it's really the motion and the cadence in the screen that makes this just such a letdown compared to the Model 3 original. We're going to do a side-by-side, obviously Dreamcast on the left and Model 3 on the right from that first portion we just showed you. And I'm also going to give you a sound sample for Sega Model 3 and then the Dreamcast. But just side-by-side, you can tell the vibe is 100% totally off on the Dreamcast version of the game. It just lacks that punch, it lacks the charm, and it lacks the Sega-ness of it all. But here's your sound sample, Model 3 first, Dreamcast second, and I'll be right back.
150 in gravel, 70 very long left, 200 in tarmac, 50 cross hairpin right, 10 points.
Honestly, both sound good, but for some reason the Dreamcast sounds a little bit crunchier, and do remember that the Sega Model 3 was running off a ROM board, where obviously the Dreamcast is running off optical disc media. But let's go ahead and jump into another race on the Model 3 side of things, and it is this one track that fundamentally shows you the massive difference. Look at all the glowing lights coming out of the buildings on the side of the track. Look at the headlights going down the tarmac. Just get an overall sense of everything going on here, and even look into the distance to see if you can see any draw-in occurring. This is one of my favorite tracks because it just has such tight turns. You really have to navigate well, and you can just get the overall sensation of speed and motion here. We're going between 160 and 180 kilometers, and it really does feel like we are doing that speed in game. The camera swing, the frame rate really does sell that whole illusion of just racing super fast through city roads, and you can see there really isn't any popping anywhere on the screen. Now as we move over to the Dreamcast version, it just loses all of that punch. This is a boring, drab image, and it totally bums me out. You're also going to see in certain spots a little bit more pop-in than you would see on the Sega Model 3 version. They're kind of obscuring in that fog, but you can see things coming in and out. That doesn't mean the track isn't the same fun. The turns are the same, the challenge is the same, the handling feels exactly the same. It just doesn't bring that sense of joy, and I understand that sense of joy is not a quantifiable, measurable thing that I can put a meter to and give you a number. It is more just an overall feeling of how much fun or lack thereof you're having with a game. Now, I'm not trying to say that the Dreamcast version of this game is not fun. It's still the same fun racing, it's still the same great tracks, it's still the same awesome soundtrack. It's everything that the original developers of the Model 3 version put onto the screen, except an inferior version. So honestly, if you're going to play Sega Rally 2, there is only one way you should experience this game, and that is on the Super Model 3 emulator. And if you need a tutorial on how to do that, I will leave a link in the description below again. But just look at how colorful this is right here. It punches, it pops, it's vibrant, it has everything I want out of Sega arcade visuals. Now moving over to the snow course, my absolute kryptonite, I'm going to hit the wall. These games are not about performance, they're about the vibe. Again, we have such a fun look here. The snow has that kind of grungy brown to it because you know cars have been driving over it. You get the snow spray behind the tires, you get all of this snow particle effect coming towards the screen. Obviously not real particles, not that powerful, but it's a pseudo sort of thing. It just looks like a really fun snowy race in a storm. Now if we move over to the Dreamcast version of the game, this is the one level in which I think it does visually hold its own against the Model 3. Not in geometry and texture work, but in the vibe. They're both dark, they're both drab. It's because you are in a storm. This is the one part of the game in which I feel like the art style and intent actually came across correctly. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me how you feel about the dark nature of the Dreamcast port versus something like the Model 3 being so colorful. Even that little bit of glow in the back as the fog is drawing in does seem like you are driving through a snowstorm. So in this instance, it is the one area of the game that seems to be as close to one-to-one as you could get going from Model 3 to Dreamcast. And trust me, these weren't easy ports. And when we go back to the original race in the cockpit view again, you can just see how different these truly are. If I had to give one nod to the Dreamcast version, the blue in the sky is a little bit bluer, and I do like that look, but the overall ground, all of the mountains on the side, just don't have that same appeal. Now, if I'm being honest though, the accuracy as far as how light would be drawing into the scene and where the shadowy areas would be on Dreamcast is correct. I am a filmmaker by trade and a cinematographer by specialty, so honestly what you're seeing here in the shadow versus the light areas is very accurate as to how the light source would be actually broadcasting in engine. But honestly, what matters more is just the overall look and fun, and when it comes for that, it just is a 100% absolute win for the Sega Model 3 version of this game. The Dreamcast port was just a letdown. Sure, it was fun, sure I played the ever-loving hell out of it back in the day on my Dreamcast, but now being able to freely play the Sega Model 3 original or the Dreamcast version anytime I want, 10 out of 10 times, and twice on Sunday, I am playing the Model 3 version. For that, we're done, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.